presentation.
Good evening and welcome to Interface Live on SABC 3. International Women's Day is celebrated worldwide on March the 8th. Now, according to UN Women, that's a United Nations entity for gender equality and women empowerment, women lag far behind men in accessing land, credit and decent jobs, even though a growing body of research shows that enhancing women's economic options boost national economies. Although there has been progress in South Africa, women empowerment is still a struggle. Now, join us tonight when we explore these challenges. Our guests this evening are Henrietta Bogopane Zulu, the Deputy Minister of Women, Children and People with Disabilities, and Kubi Rama, the Chief of Operations at Gender Links. You may join this discussion by sending us your comments to 33726, that's 33726. And before we start this discussion, however, let's first look at this insert compiled by producer Kinosi Kweni.
Women in South Africa continue to make substantial strides in major sectors such as business and governance. Women also enjoy the fruits of a constitution which guarantees the protection of their right to equal freedom and security, especially in a country where the statistics on women abuse are staggering. The scourge of rape is on the increase. Reported rapes went up from 55,097 to 56,272 cases last year. The Domestic Violence Act of 1998 recognizes women as vulnerable members of society and recognizes domestic violence as a serious violation of women's rights. But gender activists say the law is only worth the paper it's written on.
If you look at things like the Domestic Violence Act and the Sexual Offences Act, some parts of that legislation have never been effectively implemented. There's very little training going into the Act, so that many personnel, especially say the police in the charge office, don't always know what the correct laws are, for example. And I think when you start to look at things like budget, one is not seeing sufficient budget being allocated to the proper training of people, to be there being sufficient sufficient specialist detectives, or sometimes to be able to have specialized courts where prosecutors who are knowledgeable in sexual offences would be able to run the cases there and ensure that they produce evidence properly and cross-examine and lead evidence adequately the way they should.
The recent miniskirt march in downtown Johannesburg highlights the extent to which women are sexually marginalized by men. Women face violence not only at home but also within society on a daily basis. The march was an attempt by activists and politicians to assert as well as to educate taxi drivers about women's right to dignity. Despite the fact it is the second such initiative in 2 years, attitudes have not changed. In a recent victory for gender lobbyists, the Cape Town court convicted a group of men who raped and killed a young lesbian woman from Gugulethu Township.
Occasions and events such as violence against lesbians in particular, be it any other violence as well, is always about, compelling us to be vigilant about the values of the Constitution. I think there's a collective responsibility from all of us, whether it's a policymaker, a politician, a religious leader, a teacher, an educator, a traditional leader. We all have fundamental responsibilities in keeping this Constitution alive and actually making sure that people's physical lives and their physical security is also protected.
But it is not all doom and gloom. An analysis of last year's local government election results by advocacy group Gender Links shows that women constitute 38% of councillors. This is a drop from 40% in 2006. The ANC's 50-50 quota has subsequently pushed women representation in parliament. At the moment, 42.7% of all MPs are women. Though encouraging, social activists say it's still yet to be seen what tangible influence these women MPs have when it comes to real decision-making and impacting the lives of women.
Some of the women who one puts into those quota positions don't necessarily themselves support the notion of women's rights, or don't necessarily themselves come from a background where they are interested and informed about wanting to promote women's rights. So I think sometimes what ends up happening is you have men and women who think in a very similar way. So I think we need to reopen debates about focusing purely on quotas and start to talk about transformation and equality in much more substantive terms. You know, what would women's lives look like if there was real change? Not just are there how many men, how many women.
Even the media has been fingered when it comes to the lack of gender transformation.
Where we might be lacking is women's leadership within media structures and institutions. And I think that's probably where we need to be zooming in a little stronger in improving the representation of women in the media.
Many have hailed South Africa's constitution as the most liberal and progressive in the world. But the question is, does a woman living in South Africa feel any more safer? Kinosi Kwene, Interface.
Thank you very much, Kinosi and Queni, producer with us here. Now, as I've alluded to earlier on, our two guests this evening to talk about this very important issue is Deputy Minister Henrietta Bogopane Zulu of the Ministry of Women, Children and People with Disabilities, as well as Kubi Rama. Kubi is COO at Genderlinks. Ladies, good evening, welcome, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jeremy.
If I may start with you and just sketching the background before we unpack some of the key issues that Kinosi has highlighted. 18 years ago, let's start there because that'll set the platform more or less. 18 years ago, we are into a democratic dispensation, a country with one of the most advanced, if not the constitutions, and we are being looked at really jealously in being in possession of this constitution. A lot of people ask, but why are we still talking about this? The mere fact, as we've just heard from Kinosi, the reply from gender activists is that the law meant to protect these vulnerable members of society is worth only the paper that it's written on. Is that why we're talking about this? Please, if I may start with you, Kubi.
We're talking about it because the sentence that those young men received for raping and killing the young lesbian woman in Khayelitsha was the lesser sentence than you would get for killing a rhinoceros.
Is that really fair? I mean, you are really taking an isolated case. Let's look at it with an isolated. Let's talk generally within a South African community, South African public, and we have the pillars of protection that's been put in place. So yes, now you're only alluding to one instance here.
I think that one incident is illustrative of a much bigger problem, is that many women in South Africa who have been raped, who have experienced violence, do not get justice. The justice system does not serve them well. Dockets get lost. Cases take years and years and years. Perpetrators or alleged perpetrators are out on bail and often live in the same community, sometimes in the same street. And women live in fear because the alleged perpetrator is right there. So the justice system in South Africa is failing women who have experienced violence. The Domestic Violence Act, our acts, our constitution are spectacular and they're brilliant. On paper, they are brilliant. The difference is we need to now see how those rights are realized in a real way for women.
Your reaction, Minister, what she has just said now, of course, and what we have seen in the insert, well, that as the Deputy Minister or second in charge of having that custodian responsibility, so to speak, it's not really about the confidence coming your way.
I must be very honest. I think we must agree that the justice system is a process. That's the first thing. But we are all in agreement. And even the ministers forming the justice cluster are all in agreement. When it comes to violence against women and children, we've not done very well. And we're the first ones to admit that. We have the brilliant laws. They are not being implemented as we should. And the justice system, especially the judiciary, have really not come on board. And we don't want, as the ministry, to defend because the judges are not necessarily really doing a very excellent job in terms of issues around gender-based violence.
Granted, Yes, the justice people are not here, of course, to state their case, but in
Yes.
terms of your portfolio, the work that you are mandated to do, you feel that you've been relatively successful, if not totally, in your task at hand?
I think we're doing well. This is a new department that started in 2009. So the first year, you start by finding your ground. The second year is starting to employ those that you need to employ. And the third year is getting your systems in order. And this department is about promoting the rights. It's like the activists within government. It's about promoting the rights of women, children, and persons with disabilities. It's about consolidating and coordinating government's programs.
Both the public that's really on the receiving end, are they receptive to that, the good results coming from government? We've had the miniskirt march the other day, and that was really testimony to people being unhappy with the set. And let's get some reaction from Kubi, and then you may react quickly, Minister.
I think the old adage, put your money where it counts, you know. Let's put the budget behind these activities. It's not about the single march. I mean, we have to commend the ministry for initiating the GBV Council, the National Council on Gender-Based Violence, which is due to be launched fairly soon. I think it's the first time that government has recognized the scale of the problem and recognized that it's a problem just as HIV/AIDS is a problem in this country, and we need a national coordinating structure to address GBV.
Well, budgetary issues we're going to be exploring later on. Also, Minister, I'll give you a chance to react to that. We're going to have to take a break, and when we come back, we'll look at just those issues. Don't go away. Welcome back to Interface Live on SABC3, reminding you once again that we're talking about matters gender issues, and welcome to participate in this discussion by sending us your comments to 33726. Now, as we have seen in the insert, women representation has increased in Parliament, but there is doubt that this has impacted gender inequality. 42% of women sit in Parliament, but there are less women at provincial and local government levels. Now, where government should be closer and interacting with communities. And amongst this, of course, and also the matter that we've alluded to earlier on regarding matters budgets, let's quickly look at that. Minister, yes, South Africa should be lauded and applauded for exactly that, what they have achieved. Mm-hmm. And if memory serves, the study done about 6-7 years ago by the World Economic Forum on just that, South Africa ranked more or less 16th out of 58 countries. That was the sample size, which wasn't that bad for a country as young as South Africa. Mm-hmm. Why is that not trickling down to local government level?
Let me be honest and say that I think that is a question that I would encourage you to invite all political parties, because the 38% that you're talking about in terms of women councillors comes from the African National Congress. So you have a lot of parties that are not necessarily contributing to up in that figure. So with the 50-50%, obviously as we go along, we are going to be seeing the increase of women. It goes also in Parliament. You've got the highest number of members of Parliament coming from one party, the ANC, while other parties are not necessarily contributing to the figure. So it becomes a little of an imbalance that's going to be with us for a while, as parties need to actually take their female members very, very seriously.
Yeah. Minister, again, for the sake of clarity, I'll talk through these figures, but it's on our screen now. And Kubi Graphic 1 indicates there clearly that the proportion of female candidates vary from these by province, with gender parity not achieved in any one of these provinces. Gauteng, as you can see there, with North the West and Northern Cape, all achieved 40%, which is the highest proportion of women candidates. The DA-dominated Western Cape, which had the lowest proportion of female candidates, about 33%, despite being led by female Premier Helen Zille and her partner, as it's put, Patricia de Lille, former leader of the Independent Democrats.
We need a legislated quota in South Africa, because the representation of women at the moment is dependent on a single party. If the ANC did not have that quota in place, the proportion of women would be a lot lower. And the problem we're faced with right now, at local government, the proportion of women went down because the ANC lost ground in some local councils. So none of the other parties actually have a quota in place. Mm-hmm. So the proportion, it's actually a very dangerous place to be. We need a legislated quota. Someone like Helen Zille cannot justify an all-male by herself, cabinet, and on the basis that those were the best people for the job. I personally am insulted by that. What is she saying? There are no skilled women in the Western Cape.
Again, we need those laws. I mean, is that the way to go, Deputy Minister? I mean, to legislate, really, to enforce? And the other question is, of course, who's going to be playing the M&E role? Joe Public?
Well, that's our job. As the ministry, we are the monitors and evaluators, but we also established the monitoring and evaluation led by Minister Chabani in the presidency. But yes, as the President has indicated in the State of the Nation address, we will definitely be introducing the gender bill that is going to do exactly what Kumi is recommending. We are going to be regulating and empowering women. And we need to ensure that 50% women constitute more than 50% of this country, and they therefore need to begin to claim the space. So, yes.
Let's have a look at the other graph that also gives some perspective. It shows the proportion of women, ladies, and men on the proportional list of the 6 political parties that's being analysed. The ANC had the highest proportion of women at it's coming in at 47%, it seems, followed by COPE at 38%. The UDM came in at a third, 37%, followed by the ACDP at 36%. And then the DA 33%, as well as the IFP at just after at 32%. Only the ANC came close to the meeting the required 50-50 quota, Kubi, by having the largest proportion of women on their party list. Now, COPE and the ACDP and the UDM also came close to achieving parity without quotas. So you can do it without those.
But they haven't reached parity. I mean, the ANC came close to being 50-50, but none of the other parties even came close. And what you're talking about is women on the list. What we need to look at is the women who actually were elected. And those figures will be a lot less. For the DA, for example, because it's where are women located on that list. What you'll find is that the top of the list constitute many men, and women are quite low down. So it's highly unlikely that they will get elected. Now, the ANC has a zebra list. So they have man, woman, man, woman, man, woman. So it's very likely then women are quite high on that list. So legislated quota, in my view, is the only way we're going to get that parity, because if you do speak to the political parties, there's a sense that somehow it's going to happen. But if all parties do not adopt a zebra method, a quota, and put women on the top of that list, it's not going to happen.
DM, that's on the horizon. It's going to come?
Yes, we are going to put the quotas because that is a constitutional obligation that we have as legislators. So it's in a draft form. We're finalizing the policy as the ministry, and we will, once the policy has gone through the necessary consultation processes, it's finalized, it's going to lead to the drafting and the finalization of the bill, which once Cabinet approves, we are going to introduce it in Parliament. That is a constitutional obligation. It's not something, it's not a nice to have. And the ANC as the ruling party has ensured that because they are the ruling party, they need to have the 50-50. They have implemented that. They have introduced it, and as cadres of the ANC in government, we are responsible to implement the party policies.
Right. Deputy Minister, yes, of course, well and good, a lot would say, but time constraints, what are we looking at, time frames?
We are definitely, because you are guided by policy, by public consultations. If the public responds positively to what we are placing before them, we are looking at also taking into consideration the parliamentary program, because we're looking at introducing the bill by March 2012.
Well, there we go.
March 2013, Jeremy.
2013, that's about a year from now, regarding women representation on all spheres within the political spectrum. All changes coming. Well, we're going to be taking a break and continuing this very interesting discussion right after this. Don't go away. Welcome back to Interface Live on SABC 3. Last year, during the 16 Days campaign to end violence against women and children, the Minister of Women and Children launched the Council on Gender-Based Violence. The council is chaired by Deputy President Kgalema Motlanthe. The council will be responsible for coordinating a multi-sectoral response to gender violence and drive the 365 National Action Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children, launched in 2007. The Council held a briefing in December. Gender Links is a member of that Council, and perhaps a good point to start as to where are we with that Council, Kubi, and what has the Council achieved thus far?
The Council hasn't been launched. Gender Links is part of the task team to set up the Council. Well, it's actually being led and driven by the Ministry of Women. There have been several meetings. The terms of reference and the operational guidelines for the Council are in the process of being finalized. The Council, the target date, from what I understand, for launch is by the 31st of March this year.
Just reminding our viewer as well, just again for your opinion on the gender issue and what you think pertaining to the status quo within civil society. Is there a remarkable difference with regards to the challenges that these vulnerable members of society face? 33726, that's the SMS number, 33726. Apologies about that. The information that I've gotten is that the Council has been launched. But, Minister, we have alluded to right in the beginning of the program about the, can I call it, demonstrations by having miniskirts marches. We're still having programs such as the 16 days of activism against women and children to stop that, etc. Now, something tells civil society that it's not really working. Having to have victims of crime, those vulnerable persons, going to police stations and bring it to the attention of the authorities, and having insensitive persons in uniform not knowing how to deal with this appropriately. Somewhere the buck stops with someone, and it seems to, again, members of civil society, that accountability is not at the order of the day.
I think, yes, let's agree, as I said at the beginning, that police, in terms of the Domestic Violence Act, are supposed to be trained. But at the same time, we've also will be training more women, because it's a two-way street. As a woman, when you rock up and a police officer gives you grief, you need to know which buttons to press. And that is also another gap that we've identified. So yes, accountability, it's obviously what Gender Links and all NGOs are about, but we also, as the Ministry for Women, Children and Persons with Disabilities, we do have now established a fully functioning MNE unit.
Having to know which buttons to press, is the feeling that you have at Gender Links and societies like yours, that our society, that the vulnerable persons are schooled enough in the sense that they know what those buttons are?
I think there is a huge problem around awareness of services and what exists. And then on the other side, there's a problem around those services being offered efficiently and empathetically. Right now, I think we have a huge problem where there's a large amount of distrust. People don't want to go to the police because they feel they're not going to get the help they need. In fact, you know, for example, the main shelter in Gauteng is Ikaya Letemba, which is in the middle of the city of Johannesburg. If you go on a Saturday night to a police station and you have been abused and you need to go to a place of safety, and the police tell you they don't have a vehicle to take you, what are your options? So often women will go back to the abusive situation, and it's a practical thing. So we need dedicated budgets and dedicated services for gender-based violence.
Is that money going to be coming? Are there discussions currently happening that monies will be made available exactly to meet those requirements? DM?
Yes, the Department of Social Development will be increasing the shelters.
By what margins?
I cannot tell you exactly by what margin, but I know that they've received a little bit of money. It will never be enough because the problem is bigger than the money that we have. So that is, but also the Minister of Police had announced the reopening of the specialized units that were closed. Those units are being reopened, and the Minister of Justice has also ensured that we begin to roll out a specialized courts. And I can tell you where they are, they work effectively. So slowly but surely we are beginning to see those units having some impact, but the impact is slow. It could
Deputy
be
Minister, if you put your political hat on, now surely that'll be your constituency you're talking about.
Yes.
By saying there's not enough money to look at the primary needs of well-being to those, the constituency, but there's lots of money for other things in this country, then you're failing your people.
I would not say that we have enough money to deal with issues of women, but we don't have very little money either, because I know that a lot of people will look at our department. We are not an implementing department. We will ensure to make sure that all the other programs that I've spoken about are implemented. And yes, you're right. From looking at things very basically, Jerome, somebody would say we're failing women. But the truth is there's a lot of progress. There's a lot of progress, and
Well,
there's
there
a
is
lot
progress,
of
Minister. I'm going to have to leave it there. 10 seconds from your side, that progress that's there, you engage with it on an ongoing basis.
I think people have said in the insert and otherwise that quotas are not enough, but it's certainly the place to start. And I would put to South Africans that the difference women make, we would never have had the Termination of Pregnancy Act in this country had we not had the high proportion of women in Parliament.
Biram, I'm going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much. I get the impression that the ongoing talks will happen between the likes of Gender Links and others, in other NGOs like yourselves and government. Deputy Minister, thank you very much for your time, as well as Gender Links. Thank you for your time too.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for your viewers.
And that's it for tonight. Join us again next week for another episode or current affairs debate right here on Interface. And remember to email us, that's to interface on 3@sabc.co.za, or catch us on Facebook. For your views on this program, please, we welcome your comments. From me, Jerome Topley, and the rest of the team, it's good night and enjoy the rest of your viewing right here on SABC 3.